I can record also.
Thank you, Karen. Great. I'm glad I thought of that. Yes. Great. You want to send somebody an email?
Hi.
Yeah, I'll put it on YouTube and I could throw up on Facebook. That way your friends can see you. Sure.
How many people like? Because Anne was joking on Zoom.
Is she going to bring her own shofar or use one? Yeah.
Whichever one she wants to bring. She's usually better with the big shofar than the little one.
So, yeah. Or she can use mine. Okay. Thanks, Debbie. You're the greatest. Okay. Genevieve's iPad, that's Ron. Well, she'll get the nachas. I'll download the recording. I'll upload it to YouTube. I'll share it.
Rabbi, you're at 58.
Thank you.
Rabbi, you're at 58.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like a delay. Yeah. Yeah, Karen, if you would just make sure everyone is muted, please. Karen, if you would just make sure everyone is muted. Oh,
Doing it now.
let's see. If we still. Let's see. Yeah, no, I'm still getting feedback. Yeah, no, I'm still getting feedback. Let's try it one more time. Oh, I think we may be good. All right.
And I think everybody's muted, Rabbi. And
All
you're
right.
at 59 and a half.
Okay. Josh, you want to just give me a go? Good afternoon. We're so delighted to have all of you joining us for our conversation about the Akeidah, clearly one of the most disturbing and troubling stories in our entire tradition. It's great to see a few familiar faces on the screen, and I understand people's desire to remain covert, but if you have a camera and you wouldn't mind, we're all longing to see each other's faces, and it would be so lovely to see yours. I am sitting here enjoying the lovely face of my daughter, Jessie Rubenstein. Jessie and I, in anticipation of this conversation, discovered something quite unique, which is that we both talked about the Akeidah, the binding of Isaac, the story we're about to explore together in our bachelor's theses. Jessie is the Jewish studies teacher at Pardes Jewish Day School. She teaches 3rd through 8th grade Jewish studies. She's also working on a master's degree in Jewish education and education.
And Jewish studies.
And Jewish studies. And she wrote her bachelor's thesis at Kenyon College on the Akeidah in general. And I did my bachelor's thesis on Soren Kierkegaard's interpretation of Abraham and Job. And Kierkegaard did focus on the Akeidah. So without further ado, what we are going to do is plunge into the story. I'm going to share a little bit about the basic story, which you can follow along in the book of Genesis, chapter 22, and give a few general comments along the story as we tell it. Then I'm going to explore one particular issue in the story, and Jessie's going to drill down to a specific verse. So the story begins in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, which already we wonder, why does God have to test Abraham? He's already left his home, he's left his family, go to a land that I will show you. Isn't life challenging enough all on its own? Don't enough tests come to us all on our own without God, Dapka, creating this extraordinary test for Abraham? Certainly, we've all been tested in these past few months. I think we can all agree enough with being tested. But nevertheless, God put Abraham to the test, and he said to him, Abraham, and Abraham answered with the word Hineni, here I am. And we're going to see that Hineni is a refrain throughout the story. This is the first time that we hear that term. The next question that comes up is, the minute Abraham was elected into God's service, he was presented with the moral dilemma about Sodom and Gomorrah, and he protested and he protested and he protested mightily. And here, God is going to ask him to do something that is morally abhorrent, and Abraham, silent, acquiesces, gets up the next morning to go do God's will. And I was in the Army, as many of you know, for 38 years. I understand the concept of following orders. And yet, even in the Army, we are taught that if an order is an illegal order, you have an obligation to disobey that illegal order. I should mention that we have Karen Schnee here, who is monitoring and helping out with our Zoom. She'll field questions and comments in the chat. So at any point, if you would like to add something, just type a note into the chat. And Karen, thank you so much for being here. So here it is in verse 2. God says, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. This is the verse that Jessie is going to focus on in her teaching. It's not 100% clear right up front that Isaac is the child who is intended, because Abraham does have 2 sons, and we presumably imagine that he loves them both. So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. Notice that he got up early. He didn't hesitate. He didn't sleep in. He didn't want to have a second cup of coffee. When it was time to act, there was no hesitation on his part. And I think we can learn an important takeaway from that, that when there's a time of crisis, we can't ignore it. Sometimes you just have to move. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place from afar. Another theme in this story is seeing. Abraham sees the mountain. Isaac asks about the sacrifice, and Abraham says, God will see to it. Abraham sees a ram caught in the thicket, and he renames the mountain Har Adonai Yerah, the mountain where God has seen. So it begs the question of what is right in front of us, and yet we don't see it. Then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. And the rabbi suggests that it was with a prophetic spirit that Abraham said that he and Isaac would return from the mountain, because obviously Abraham knew in his heart that that was not the intended plan. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the two walked off together. They walked together. I think that walking is a very important moment in the story. Abraham had time to think. He was walking. He knew where he was going and what he was supposed to do when he got there. So this was not an impulsive or visceral reaction. Then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, father, and he answered, yes, my son. And he said, here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? 12 times in this story, Abraham is referred to by Isaac as Avi, my father. I think the Torah is clearly emphasizing the sense of the relationship, which exponentially increases the challenging nature of the whole story. How could any parent contemplate what Abraham is intending to do? What kind of a God would even ask for such a thing, even as a test? And it's interesting and heartbreaking to note that Isaac and Abraham never speak again, at least as far as we hear in the Torah. Isaac is clearly scarred by this experience. And then again, Hineni. Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for the burnt offering, my son, and the two of them walked together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, Hineni, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. And when Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thickets by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. That ram is also evocative of the shofar. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yereh, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision.
And you know, one of the interesting things to note about this theme of seeing, this theme of vision that we see in this section of our Torah reading for tomorrow, is it was also present in our Torah reading for today, when Hagar looks up and sees that well in the distance, and she calls God that God is the God who sees. So this theme of vision is present in both of our Torah readings for Rosh HaShanah, and it really begs the question at this time of year when we read these, what does God see in us?
What does God see in us? What are we not seeing in ourselves? What are we not seeing in the world? What are we not seeing in our environment? What is it that we need to renew our focus?
Rabbi, there are two comments. One,
Yes,
Lisa was saying it's an interesting parallel that angels intervene to save both of Abraham's sons and both become fathers of nations.
beautiful.
And then Erwin had a question. Could another interpretation be that Abraham is testing God as well as God testing Abraham? Abraham does not protest because he has faith that God would not be an unjust God and would not let him slay Isaac. So the story is about mutual faith, Abraham's faith in God and God's faith in Abraham. And it's only then that God seals the covenant with Abraham.
Yeah, that's absolutely, of course, we're open to all interpretations. One might imagine that it's not that God needs to test Abraham, but God needs to create an opportunity for Abraham to test himself and to demonstrate to himself the extent of his faith. So, yes, beautifully said. Apropos of the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear, the Lord declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessings upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes." Actually, thinking about the angel, there is also a midrash that suggests that Abraham kind of held God hostage in that moment and said, this order to kill my son came from you, God, and now you're sending an angel to tell me to stop. I want to hear it from the boss, as it were. And God was forced to specifically intervene. That's not what the Torah says, but the midrash suggests that Abraham was not taking it secondhand from an angel. And all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. And I think it's fair to say that the Jewish people have indeed been a blessing, and we have brought blessing to every community throughout history that has welcomed us and nurtured our right of freedom of religious expression. And when we look within, when we see ourselves, as Jessie said, we can think about, what do we see within ourselves that we have to offer to create blessing in the world?
And
Abraham,
Rabbi,
yes.
The Abrams family asked, the idea that Abraham and Isaac never spoke again is so interesting. I wonder if that added to how devastating it was for Isaac when Rebecca passed away.
So one of the interesting things about the fact that Isaac and Abraham never speak again is actually the next time we see any sort of inferred interaction between them is when Isaac is there to bury Abraham. And one of the very next things that happens in this story is we hear that Sarah has died, which is one of the themes that we'll be looking at when we talk about that first part of the story. And the idea is that the impact of this story is so devastating to this entire family that it causes the death of Sarah. It causes the breakdown between father and son. They never speak again. And so this test really kind of destroyed their family in a way.
So Abraham then returned to his servants, and notice that the text does not mention Isaac. Abraham returned to his servants, and they departed for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. There are another 4 verses that we are going to skip over right now. You can read them on your own, but basically life goes on. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about this theme of Hineni, here I am, because it's very much of a call to action. And Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, when he was relating this story, comments on the fact that the angel appears at the very last minute. The text is so evocative that he has the knife raised, he's ready to plunge it. And a student asks Rabbi Heschel, what would have happened if the angel came too late? And Rabbi Heschel memorably responded, an angel cannot come too late, but we who are made of flesh and blood, we can be too late to forestall devastation. And Heschel, as we know, was very much of a role model with regards to tikkun olam, repairing the world. And his commentary reminds us of the call to action, hineni, to be present, to act now in both our personal lives. This is the time of reconciliation in our relationships, as well as for the change that we want to see in the world. We can be too late, and there's nothing more painful than what if we had made a better choice. As we reflect on the idea of teshuvah, we can think about the ways that maybe we were not present as we wish we had been in our relationships this year. And the shofar is that call to action. When we blow the shofar, we are also reminding God of this moment in this story, because the Midrash again suggests that while Abraham in that way had God held captive, Abraham said, in the future, my descendants are going to do wrong. And when they blow that shofar, I want you to remember that I was ready to give up everything. I was ready to sacrifice my own son. And therefore, on the merit of my incredible faith, I want you to agree to forgive the people who will come generations hence.
Rabbi,
yes.
Real quick, Felix wanted to know, do we know the age of Isaac at the time of the test?
I believe he was 37 or 39.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
There are people who portray him as like this young child, but it's indicated that he is older because it's sometime after that first story that we read this morning.
He's in his late 30s.
Yeah.
It's either 37 or 39. So what do we learn from this story? I think one thing that we learn is that in Jewish tradition, we serve God by living, not by dying. And that's a lesson which we still need to hear in our own generation. Karen, are you able to put people into breakout rooms for just a couple of minutes?
Absolutely, I can.
So I'm going to ask you to break up into a little bit smaller groups. Let's say no more than 4 minutes, if you'll watch the clock, Karen. And think about Hineni, and think about one thing you feel called on to do on this Rosh HaShanah. And when you come back, if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat. Something you feel called on to do for yourself, something you feel called on to do in your relationships, something you feel called on to do in the world.
It's going to take me about 2 minutes to get everybody in groups. How big of groups do you want them, Rabbi?
Let's say 4 people.
Okay. Give me talk for about 2 more minutes while I get the breakout groups set up.
Okay. So, Jessie, if you think about what do you feel called on when you're looking at the year ahead, what is personally calling to you?
So I have a few different things that are calling to me this year. And it depends on what sphere of the world we're talking in. Primarily right now, I feel called to finish my master's degrees because I'm ready for that to be over.
I love it. Me too.
I'm ready for that to be done.
We'll have a party. You'll all be invited.
It'll be great. So that's my big thing that I really feel called to accomplish this year. And also, to develop my relationships with my kids, especially as Leon is getting older and Helena is getting older, to make sure that they're, we're spending as much time together as possible in a way that is truly present.
And how old are my beautiful grandchildren now?
Helena is 5, and she is a handful. I keep saying that she's going to make a great adult someday. That she's very opinionated and not afraid to share that. And Leon is 14 months old.
Rabbi, since I'm only a co-host, I cannot do breakout rooms. It would have to be on the computer that started the meeting. So whoever, Is-
I
if
think
there's-
Josh is on that.
I am now the host, so now I can do it. Thank you, Josh.
So what about you? What are you called to do this year?
I am called to continue to figure out ways to be actively engaged with our community in this world of virtual reality, to try to be as safe physically as possible while also staying connected to the people that I love.
That's been the hard one for us this year, is that maintaining connection. I know the kids have struggled with that. And so it's something that, is a constant reminder of the need for connection in our lives. That I see that with both my kids, that they just need it.
And I must say, this Rosh HaShanah has intensely highlighted that for me. I wish that all of you had the view that we have right now. It's kind of sad. We're sitting in our beautiful sanctuary, and instead of looking at all of your beautiful faces in person and hearing your voices and feeling your energy, we are looking at lights and screens and cameras. And I was not prepared for just how intensely disorienting and different it was going to be to walk in here last night for Erev Rosh Hashanah, and then to be here this morning. And I didn't really understand how much I loved this holiday when so many people come together.
It's so special to hear the voices of everyone.
So I'm thinking that we should go on to.
I am ready for breakout rooms when you are, Rabbi.
Okay, all right. Let's make it 3 minutes. So everybody, real fast. One thing you're called on to do, and then we'll share it in the chat. Thank you so much.
Okay, everybody should be invited to a room. And Rabbi, you're invited. You can just ignore yours.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Oh, we're not audible, are we? They're all in their breakouts? Yeah, okay.
We have a couple more people going into the breakouts.
Karen, you're doing so great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your jumping in with those comments and questions.
Oh, not a problem. There's a couple people. Did you guys not get invited? Debbie, Ellen.
All right, so this is good. They'll be back at 3:30, and then you'll have a solid 25 minutes.
Isabel, do you want me to move you? Yeah, it was giving me a hard time, Rabbi. So I was like, what's going on? So I went to Jason. I said, Jason, why? He goes, because you're not host. Like, oh, okay, never mind.
So you're watching the clock. I don't want to take too much time because Jessie has a lot to get through also.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Well, first I'm going to repeat the verse, and then we'll jump into it. Awesome. Thank you, Josh.
How are we doing on time?
About 1 more minute. And then I will.
Yeah, I think when you give them a warning, it gives them 60 seconds to finish up.
I'm going to. Thank you. Yeah. I could tell them to set it to speaker view.
All right, Rabbi, I'm going to close all rooms so they come back.
Wonderful. Thanks, Karen. I love that Helena knows how to unmute. It's a riot.
She's
Oh, I'm back now, I think.
You are.
We see you. Hi, Jay.
Oh, hello. Oh, I was in the breakout room and all of a sudden it was gone.
Yeah.
You were needed back here. Hi, Willa. Hi, Lisa.
Hey,
Shana Tova.
and to you.
Thank you.
Jessie, I just love your lipstick.
Thank you. The new thing I'm trying out, wearing makeup. It's very exciting.
Excellent.
It's just so good to see you again, Jessie. I remember how I enjoyed the sessions of Torah study that you took over for your mother when she was gone.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. So thank you. It's good to see everyone.
There they all are. Hello again and welcome back. So if you would just,
weren't ready to end.
yeah, pop a note please into the chat about what some of your thoughts were. And then we'll ask Karen to please read those for us.
All right, I'm going to start because there's about a few of them. Sarah said, I had always thought of Isaac as being a small child, a little as a late 30-year-old. What? Oh, that was a question. We'll ask that in a moment. Sorry, that was a little bit delayed. I do apologize. Erwin said, Islam was a parallel story about Ismail as the child in the sacrifice. Is their interpretation of the lesson of the story the same as the Jewish interpretation of the lesson?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for Islam. I'm not a scholar of Islam and their interpretation of this story, but I think it was in even today's newspaper, John Gabriel was writing about the origins of the tension in the Middle East, going back to the roots of Isaac and Ishmael. So it is amazing that millennia later, that conflict is still influencing world events. When you talked earlier, Jessie, about the trauma to the family, the trauma to the human family is still reverberating. It's kind of incredible.
It is interesting how focused on family the sections of Torah we read for Rosh Hashanah are. That is something that has always interested me.
Okay, the next comment, Kat and Michelle wrote, maintaining connections with faraway family members. Judith, tolerance and loving kindness to those who think differently, reach out to the first who I care about. The Abrams family, our family, and even in our group felt our call this year was a call to community, Temple High, from religious education to wider community. And Don Wright, I'm going to be open to medical advancements. And then Felix, there's coming in now. Get better at Tikkun Olam. Look for more opportunities to actively contribute to constructive change. And then the last one was Nana Shana Tova. I would like to complete the translation of my parents' Yiddish letters to pass on to my family.
What
a treasure.
Beautiful, beautiful project. Thank you all for that.
Rabbi, before
Yes.
you go, there was one question that I missed, and I'm trying to find it again, right about the age right before you went to the I had always thought of Isaac being a small child as a late 30-year-old. Why was he compliant, and why did he not resist? Compliant, and why did he not resist?
So I know that that's a topic of debate among rabbinic sources, and they said that this is also a test for Isaac to see if he would go along with this, if he would be complicit in doing God's will. So
yeah, it's interesting. I'm just hearing in my head the Leonard Cohen song, the story of Isaac. The door had opened slowly. My father came in. I was 9 years old. So Leonard Cohen knew a lot, but he didn't know the midrash of the age of Isaac.
And I think also the text plays Isaac off as younger too. The words he says sound younger. Where is father? Where is the ram? He's indicated to be a little bit younger, or at least more naive.
There's a lack of maturity about Isaac as a character among the patriarchs. Isaac, throughout the Genesis narratives, is very passive in general. You know, it's not, we see his passivity not only in this story, but look at his whole marriage. You know, somebody else went and got him a wife, and that's okay. You know, you know, he took her in his tent, and he loved her. And, you know, if it had been somebody else, he would have loved her. He's just in the blessing of Jacob and Esau. Also, he is not the primary mover of the story. In that case, it's also Rebecca. So I think it's not just in this moment that we see Isaac as a passive character.
Yeah, it is a theme. Yeah. So I'm going to encourage you at this point to put your screen, if you're able, on speaker view, because we're going to be presenting some text at this point that will be broadcast in place of our faces. So if you're just looking at it in gallery view, you'll see this tiny little text, and it will be very difficult to read. So if you're able to put it into speaker view, that would serve well at this point. So we're going to be focusing back now on the second verse in this story. I'm going to repeat it again. And he said, "Take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you." So this is a verse that has been picked apart throughout the centuries because it is just such an interesting way to phrase it. So the Torah is known for its economy of language. So the Torah won't often repeat something unless it's important. And here, why doesn't it just say, "Take your son and go to the land of Moriah that I will show you"? The Torah says, "Take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love." So it gets more and more specific as the text goes into it. It's not enough to just say, "Take your son." And why is that? This has been talked about for millennia now. And so we have a few texts that we're going to look at examining this single verse because it is such an interesting verse to look at. So our first text is from Bereshit Rabbah, and it says, "And he said, 'Take please your son,' etc. Said God to him, 'Take, I beg you.'" And that the polite form "na" is used there as like this is a request. "Please, your son." And then here we see this dialogue between Abraham and God. "Which son? I have two sons," he said. "Your only son," replied he, meaning God. "This one is the only one to his mother, and this one is the only one of his mother. The one you love, is there a limit to affections?" "Yitzchak, take Isaac," said he. And why did God not reveal it to him without delay? In order to make him, Yitzchak, Isaac, even more beloved in his eyes, and reward him for each and every word spoken. This agrees with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, "Get out of your country," this means from your province, "and from your kindred," from your neighborhood, from your father's house, literally your father's house, "to the land that I will show you." So we see this mirroring of those two stories where Abraham is called to follow God, and again here Abraham is called to make the sacrifice of his son. Why did he, meaning God, not reveal it to him there and then? In order to make it more beloved in his eyes and to reward him for each and every word said and for each and every step taken. So in this text, we have this, we talk often that we don't see this, this interplay of Abraham trying to argue. But this text here is saying that Abraham did have some argument here, and this is Abraham maybe trying to make sure that he's getting right in his mind what God is asking him to do. That Abraham can't even believe that God is asking this. And this is his subtle way of pushing back on what God is asking him to do.
Jessie,
So-
before you go on, there's 2 comments real quick, kind of about what you just said. He always, the Abrams family always imagined the 13-year-old old enough to participate as an adult, act like a sacrifice, but quite old enough to have a skepticism you might expect from a 37-year-old, very trusting. And then Lisa also said Abraham is portrayed as not such a great father. He was not good to Ishmael, certainly not to Isaac, not to the sons of the second wife. So I thought those would be things you can grab in. Sorry for interrupting.
So Abraham is certainly not portrayed as the best father figure. And that's actually a common theme of the patriarchs in Genesis. None of them are what you would call great father figures.
I think it continues into Exodus with Moses.
That's true. That's true. Fathers who are not really present in their son's life in a positive way. That's a very common theme that we see in Genesis and Exodus, and in many of the stories of the early fathers that we see. That is something interesting to note, that Abraham is not the best father. And what it really brings up to me is the example that we set for children is the example that they will tend to follow. So Abraham was not a very present father for Isaac, and Isaac, likewise, not a present father for his 2 sons.
I think that's how I would understand that concept of the sins of the parents being visited on the children.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So this text also really points out that it's in Abraham's pushing of who God particularly means that the blessing is heaped more and more on Abraham. That it is that pushback that is what brings Abraham blessing. And I, as someone who loves questions and talking, especially to my students, about the finer points of their questions, that really, to me, speaks to the love of the Jewish people of questions. That we don't just, this text is trying to indicate that we don't just blindly accept. That it is when we push back with questions that blessings come to us more and more. So that's one of that's what's indicated to me, at least, from this text. And I would love to hear what you all think about that idea of questioning being what brings us blessing. So if you want to type that in the chat, I'd love to hear that.
So I love that the tradition says in Pirkei Avot that the person who is embarrassed doesn't learn, indicating to me a person who is afraid to ask a question. We had our teen service earlier, and I was in a breakout room with the teens, and the term was radical was used. And one of the teens asked, what does radical mean in that context? And Ron was in the room, and he commented to me afterwards, I love that if they didn't know what a word meant, that they ask. And I try to always compliment my students if they don't know when they ask, because that's the only way we learn is by asking questions.
It is. We can't move forward without asking questions. And even when I think of us calling ourselves the children of Israel, to me, I always think about that term Israel means the one who wrestles with God. And so really that's our place, is to be that force that wrestles with what God wants us to do and really questions our place within the divine order. So,
Rabbi, there's 2 comments. One from the Abrams that says, we see this throughout the book of Samuel too. Eli and Samuel David can be interpreted as absentee fathers. And then Myra had a question. Wouldn't Abram have been 120 years old if this son was 37?
So I know that Isaac was born when Abraham was 100.
Right.
So so Abraham would have been 137 at this point.
Right, which is another theme that we see in Genesis in the Torah, is that sometimes you reach an advanced age and you are asked to do something really challenging.
Yeah.
Noah was how old when he started building the ark?
600.
And how old was Moses? Moses was not a kid when.
No, he was no spring chicken at that point.
Yeah.
So Dawn had commented that she that is so true, that there is no such thing as a dumb question. Great that you encourage that with our youth. And then Felix commented, I remember in yeshiva we were rewarded gold stars on the board if we challenged or asked a hard question that the rabbi had to research in order to answer. Much more value than knowing the answer to the rabbi's question.
Right. So many of you have heard my favorite story about Isidore Rabbi, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And when he was asked what was the greatest influence in your life that led you to become a Nobel Prize winning physicist, his response was that every day when I came home from school, instead of asking me, what did you learn in school today? My mother asked me, did you ask any good questions? And that's how I learned that the way you learn is by asking questions.
And that's one of the things that I really value in my interactions with my students. And one of the things I love so much about teaching kids is that I love when they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to.
There you go.
And it really, I think as a teacher, is also important to say, I don't know. It's not enough to just encourage questions. It's also important to be able to say, I don't know, because it shows them that learning is a lifelong process.
As a teacher and as a parent.
Yes.
Very, very powerful.
And Rabbi Lisa just commented, one of the great blessings of Judaism is the unrestrained passion for the questions.
Amen to that.
Yes. So I think we're going to skip the second text and move straight on to the third text, which is from Kvav HaYashar. So once it is up on the screen, there it is. All right. The Midrash tells us, for example, that this is what happened to Abraham because he did not invite any poor people to the feast that he made upon Yitzchak's weaning. Commenting on the verse, and after these matters. So we're coming from the story we read this morning, and then this follows up on that. The Midrash explains that it was in response to the Satan's indictment that the Holy One, blessed is he, subsequently commanded Abraham, take now your son, your only one Yitzchak, and offer him there for a burnt offering. So in the Jewish tradition, we don't have the same figure of Satan as we see in the Christian tradition. Instead, Hasatan, the Satan, is this figure who pushes to test human beings to see if they really are as loyal to God as they proclaim to be.
So you can't hear that and not think of Job.
Exactly. So here we see that this test is actually a punishment for Abraham, that Hasatan has said to God, Abraham claims to be this holy, pious man, and yet he did not invite the poor.
And known for his hospitality. Doesn't the Midrash tell us his tent was open on all four sides so he could greet visitors coming from every direction? When the messengers come to announce the birth of Isaac in the first place, he runs to greet them.
Despite having just been circumcised.
With no anesthesia.
At 99 years old.
Or ice.
So here we see this indictment on Abraham's character, that this test is really because Abraham has been portrayed as someone who he is not being.
So that tells me that it was really Sarah who was the one who was all about Hachnasat Orchim, welcoming guests, and Abraham, left on his own, was bereft.
So again, we see that strong female figure behind the male figure in the Torah.
There you go.
Which continues on with Isaac. So
Jesse, real quick, Sarah Abrams recently heard a quote by Walt Whitman. Be curious, not judgmental. I'm thinking about this as we discuss the importance of questioning.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that I find so important when asking a question and when responding to a question, is it's important to ask a question from the perspective of actually wanting to know, instead of asking a question for the sake of asking the question in a kind of snide and judgy way, and responding to questions with grace and love, instead of how do you not know this?
So if you happen to be listening to my sermon earlier today, one of the questions that came up in that discussion was, how can we have any sense of healing or forward movement in the divisive moment that we find ourselves historically? And I think that's a strong part of the answer, is approaching each other with curiosity, with listening without judgment.
Yes, and then that lack of that necessity to kind of weed out judgment in how we interact with others is something that we really have to focus on, not just in this particular time, but at the whole scope of where we live now. How often do we see, like in media, that automatic rush to judge, instead of trying to show compassion and understanding for where people are coming from.
In the Army, they say, ready, fire, aim. Doesn't work that way.
And we're reminded of this in Pirkei Avot, Dan l'chapsachut. We should always try to judge people on the scale of merit, trying to understand their actions as coming from this,
Give the benefit of
the doubt to what they did.
And I quoted that in my response this morning also. Oh, you would listen?
I was listening.
Okay.
I was there.
All right, Jessie, we have probably just another 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Did you want to try to do another text?
Yes. So I'll always try to squeeze in one more text. So we see this theme of Satan, Hasatan, in a lot of different commentaries, as this both the cause of this test of Abraham and also in the aftermath. So I wanted to talk for a moment about the aftermath of this test. So I have one of the next texts is from My Jewish Learning about Sarah and the Akeidah, which is a wonderful read if you have a moment to just go through the whole thing. There's a lot of very interesting commentary about Sarah's role in the Akeidah, because immediately after we hear about this episode, we get into Parshat Chayei Sarah, in which Sarah dies. So the rabbi saw this connection between the sacrifice of Isaac, or the almost sacrifice of Isaac, and the death of Sarah. So I wanted to look at that first text where it says Sarah as shofar. So Abraham was not happy in this world of mine, and you seek to be happy. A son was born to him when he was 100 years old, and in the end the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, take now your son and offer him for a burnt offering. Abraham went a distance of 3 days' journey. After 3 days he perceived a cloud resting on the top of a mountain. Said he to Isaac, my son, do you see what I see? And he answered him, what do you see? He inquired. He told him, I see a cloud resting on top of a mountain. He said to Ishmael and Eliezer, do you see anything? No, they answered him. So we see that sometimes Ishmael is seen as that second servant who has come to the mountain with Isaac and Abraham to have Isaac offered as the sacrifice. He took Isaac his son and led him up mountains and down hills. He took him up on one of the mountains, built an altar, arranged the wood, prepared the altar pile, and took the knife to slay him. Had not an angel from heaven called him, Isaac would have already been slain. There is proof that this is so far for Isaac. Returned to his mother, and she said to him, where have you been, my son? Said he to her, my father took me and led me up the mountains and down hills. Alas, she said, for the son of a hapless woman. Had it not been for that angel, you would have been slain. Yes, he said to her. And so we're going to see that there's a parallel here between Sarah and the shofar. Thereupon she uttered 6 cries, corresponding to the 6 blasts of the shofar. It has been said she had scarcely finished speaking when she died. Hence it is written, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Where did he come from? Rabbi Judah, son of Rabbi Shimon, said, he came from Mount Moriah. Now Abraham harbored doubts in his heart and thought, perhaps heaven forfend, some disqualifying blemish has been found in him, and his offering has not been accepted. A heavenly voice went forth and said to him, go your way, eat your bread with joy, for God has already accepted your works. So we hear that Sarah in her last moments was uttering the cry of the shofar, that she is so distraught upon Isaac telling her what has happened to him, that she calls out and then she dies. And there's something very poignant about that for me, that Sarah calls to God with this guttural cry, and that guttural cry is echoed for us at this time of year with the shofar.
And the sound of the shofar, it does pierce right into our soul. It's one of the reasons that this shofar is so moving and inspiring, is because it's an emotional connection that we have. It's not something intellectual that we think about, which reminds me to invite all of you. We're going to wrap up here in just a moment for Tashlich at 4 o'clock. And tonight and tomorrow night, we have our shofar extravaganza. So if you would like to have that experience of hearing the shofar live, we have 4 time slots tonight and tomorrow. I understand that there's still space to sign up, 6, 6:30, 7, or 7:30. It's very safe. You drive onto the temple campus, roll down your window, and we'll have a very, very brief shofar service, but you'll get to hear the shofar in person. So you're invited. We'd love to see you. We wish you a Shana Tova Umtuka. And I want to really thank Jessie for making the time away from her precious family to be here with all of us, and the same to you. Shana Tova. Thank you so much for joining us.